my leadership style has changed as a result of having the opportunity to work with some great leaders and great mentors throughout my career. Now, I've had the bad boss or two. You can't escape the fact that they exist. Um, but I've been very, very lucky, and I've seen how my leadership has evolved and will always evolve, because I've now understand that leadership is not, here's the structure today and it's always going to be this structure. You have to adapt as the economy and as people evolve, etc. And so I was looking back one day, or somebody asked me, well, how did you lead when you were, fresh out of college? And I thought for a second and I said, well, I graduated college in 1984. In 1984, in the United States, leadership was still somewhat like it was in the 70s and 60s, more authoritarian, although starting to evolve, where your manager or leader basically gave you a list of things that you had to accomplish that day. Today, that's not how I lead. I'm more collaborative, giving people freedom of how to get to the end of the job and helping them and coaching them through that. And as I was having this conversation, I kept thinking about my first team that I managed right out of college. And I literally said on this podcast, I think I need to find them all and apologize.
Today, I'm joined by Jim Carlough, a seasoned business strategist, a speaker, and author of The 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership, a Roadmap to Success. Jim has over 30 years of experience transforming teams, driving business growth. And he's here today to share his philosophy that, among other things, leaders aren't born, they're developed, which I have to say aligns pretty well with what I do here at Leading with Integrity. So as well as hearing about his 6 Pillars Roadmap, we'll also be talking about some of the big topics of leadership, from the role of humour to the meaning of integrity, and why legacy is something that every leader should be thinking about. And Jim's got some pretty inspirational stories to illustrate these points.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Jim, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's wonderful to have you on the show. Great to meet you as well, and looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah, it's great to meet you as well, David. I think that some of our principles are well aligned, and it'll serve for a good introduction and conversation, I think, this morning.
Yeah, no doubt. And on that note, over to you for a little bit, really, to introduce yourself to listeners. Tell us a bit about your career so far, what you do today, why you do it, all of those lovely things.
Yeah, today I serve as Chief Sales Officer for a healthcare digital engagement company. In the United States, we touch probably 1 out of every 3 Americans with some aspect of our work, although they may not even know what we do. But that's what I do full time. I have spent my entire professional career in the healthcare arena, either working for health insurance carriers themselves, or in the late 90s, I migrated onto the technology side of healthcare and kind of never went back. And it's been very profitable for our family. I have raised 3 kids. We have raised 3 kids. If my wife hears this, she'll slap me. We have raised 3 kids. She did all the hard work. I did all the traveling. I can honestly tell you that all 3 kids are not only off the payroll, all 3 kids are successful, and all 3 kids are off the cell phone plan, which here in the United States is very odd, because adults with their own families tend to be still on their parents' cell phone plan.
Yeah, in the UK, I think it's more of the car insurance plan than the cell phone. But yeah, I get the reference. The healthcare industry, I mean, particularly in your part of the world, must be, I was going to say, a challenging industry to work in. But tell us a bit more about your experiences over those years.
So we have some uniqueness as a country because we don't nationalize healthcare in the way that other countries do in Europe or even in Canada to the north of us. And it is challenging because there are, I call it a 3-legged stool. You've got one leg of the stool, which is the insurance companies. You have another leg of the stool, which is your providers, which are hospitals and doctors. And the third leg of the stool is the pharmaceutical industry, where you get your prescription drugs. And the challenge that we have here in the United States is the only reform we have ever had, and restrictions are all on the insurance companies. There has never been reform targeted to the pharmaceutical companies or to the provider community. Now, obviously, we need our providers, but unlike other countries, providers here in the United States are in the highest of income brackets, especially when you get into specialized surgeries and things of that nature. And with the economy the way it is in the United States, that sort of makes sense. Whereas in other countries, providers are not necessarily on that same level. A doctor in Europe or a doctor in India is not necessarily always a white collar job, as I'll call it. And so I think those differences play into having a play in that. The other aspect of it is from a pharmaceutical perspective, the United States pays more than its fair share to the R&D development for pharmaceuticals worldwide. And there's been talk over the last few years to try to fix that or to try to balance that out. But I don't think we'll ever solve the healthcare financing challenge in the US until everybody sits at the same table and they strive for the same goals. So now health insurance companies in the US have to spend a certain dollar amount of every dollar on the actual medical care itself, which, if you think about it, actually says they're forced to have a fixed margin, because if they don't pay that money out, they have to reimburse that back to the insurers. And so if they've got a fixed margin, why doesn't the pharmaceuticals and the providers, in my opinion? Now, there's a lot of pundits in the United States would probably hear me say this and want to attack me, but that's my personal opinion. We have multiple insurance carriers. It's not a single payer system. Medicare is no longer a single payer system because we have Medicare Advantage plans. So someone who's over the age of 65 can choose either traditional Medicare for medical costs, or they can join a Medicare Advantage plan, which potentially could give them more or better coverage and additional services that you can't get under traditional Medicare. So we could have an 8-hour conversation on all of this alone, and I know we don't want to do that, but it is interesting. We're going through a challenging time right now in the United States because there's been a dramatic increase in medical inflation and the risk level of the population. We're not the healthiest of populations, and that's another challenge that we have. And at the rate that new drugs are coming out and the cost of those, take the GLP things that are coming on the market for weight loss. A lot of plans don't cover those, and those are not inexpensive. Originally designed for those with diabetes, they're finding that for people with weight loss or other conditions, these drugs can be very, very helpful. But my question would be, what's the margin on that to the pharmaceutical company, and who's paying that bill? But anyway, I don't want to have an economics discussion, but I'm as you can tell, I'm passionate, having been in this my entire career.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. And I mean, you're right. It is, it's politicized wherever you go. I mean, even here where we do have like national health service and things like that, that has its own challenges as well. It's free at the point of use, but we still pay for it in our taxes and things like that. So it's not like it is free. And it's, of course, has its own challenges, which again, I don't want to get into the politics in the UK either, because again, I will be under attack for that as well, I'm sure.
We'll have people arriving at our homes and taking us away.
Indeed. But so the point that I find particularly interesting around this, which is maybe not so political, is what you said about the R&D and the burden of that. And I think it probably applies to other industries as well in terms of how you price things, whether it's your services or your products, and how much the customer is responsible for your costs of coming up with the idea or whatever. And there is an interesting aspect in that, I think, particularly with your sales background as well, of course.
Yes. So it is interesting, but I mean, it's evolving, right? It's evolving, and no different than leadership is always evolving. So it's just, one of those challenges that we have to deal with.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, thank you for humoring me with that question anyways. So leadership then, you have your own approach, the 6 pillars of effective leadership. So tell us a bit about that and how it works and introduce it briefly.
Over the last 25 years, I've done a lot of mentoring of other people who have come to me and say, hey, will you be my mentor and can you give me guidance and help? And I should have thought about monetizing that years ago. And I didn't. I just did it because I thought it was an obligation that I had to help others become leaders and become better at what they do. And so I started thinking about retirement, and I started thinking about, can I go fishing every day? And it hit me that said, I can't go fishing every day. My mom, who's 100 years old, alive and well, lives by herself in a house, cooks and bakes every day. And I asked her when she turned 100 what her secret was. And she said, it's staying busy. She said, I don't have time to die. I'm too busy. And she has a daily routine that starts first thing in the morning, and she goes through it. A couple of years ago at the age of 97, she was supposed to renew her driver's license. So she went to motor vehicles at 97, stood in line, got up in line, and they issued her a 10-year driver's license. My mom looked at them and said, are you kidding me? I'm not going to make it to I hope I don't make it to 107. And I don't think you want me driving at 107. But the humor in just people not thinking through this, but my mom having the rational thought of saying, do you really want me to have a driver's license for, 10 more years? So ironically, she decided on her own at 98 to stop driving. And more so because she didn't trust other people on the road. And she only really went from her house to the grocery store or to church. And so she turned her driver's license in. So she doesn't have a driver's license anymore. She sold her car. But it's all about being active. So as I thought through this, I said, why couldn't I start speaking on leadership and helping people on a bigger scale other than just one-on-one for people who approach me? And so I started to think about the pieces of leadership that not only that I learned and that I use, but what are the challenges that I see the people who I've mentored have had. And I started making a list of all of the characteristics that I helped each person with. And I had a list of about 18 items. And I said, ooh, I can't speak about 18 items and expect somebody to implement them. I need to really think about carving this down to something that's practical, implementable, and will drive much higher results in terms of effectiveness of a leader, creating a following of a leader, keeping, retention of employees. And it really narrowed down to 6 key attributes that if one uses them, will have higher performing teams, more focused and dedicated teams, and you'll have a following. I have a number of people who, when I change my job, are always saying, hey, if you've got a position for me, I've worked for you before, we'd love to work with you again, which to me I take as a compliment. And the reason is they know how I lead and they know what to expect. And so I think those pillars become important. And so as I started speaking about this outside of work, at conferences and things, I then said, I probably am not as credible as a person like Simon Sinek, who has 8 books or whatever the number is. So I said, I think I should write a book, which I did. And I finished it the end of last year and it came out, and I've now had over 1,000 book sales in about 6 months. It came out right before the holidays, so nothing really happened till mid to late January. So I guess 7 months it's been out, which I think is pretty good. I don't know what others would think. A, the fact that I finished a book, how many people start one and never finish it? But number 2, it has gotten a little bit of a following. and that's refreshing. So that's kind of how we got to where we are today. And so I'm here spreading the word and talking about things that I think are important to you and I.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know how many people who start a book finish one, but someone did tell me yesterday that of the number of people who say they're going to write a book one day, only 1% of them ever do. So, you've done pretty well there. I think you've beaten the stats, haven't you? So
that's what I think as well.
Yeah, and 1,000 copies. I mean, can't say fairer than that, can you? I don't have a book, so I don't have any reference to compare that against, but it seems like a good number to me. Well, I'd be happy with that.
In terms of when I mention that to people, especially people or podcasters who have written a book or whatever, they seem impressed. And I am. I mean, I expected, maybe a few relatives would buy the book and, maybe I hit 100 or whatever. But, and the reviews that have come in have actually been very, very positive. I think I have 1 4-star review last time I checked, and the rest are 5 stars.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good. Can't argue with that, can you? Yeah. And then the story of your mother as well. I mean, what a lovely outlook on life. You're so right about the active thing. She's hit the nail on the head there, I think. Because, I mean, how many relatives have we all had over the years? Like, the moment they start to decline is when they stop doing things, isn't it, for whatever reason? So that's always been in the back of my mind of like, just keep going as long as you can. Like, I've got a few decades to go yet, thankfully, but I hope. But, just keep going. So I love that story as well.
Me as well, I hope.
I think you've pretty much answered the next question already. You've given us the backstory of how you came up with the 6 pillars and why you did it as well. So, I mean, can we maybe go into a little bit about them and how the book talks about it as well?
Sure. For those who have not seen my book, I actually have a copy here, just in case. And I have it over my shoulder.
I spotted it, yeah.
Placement advertising for free.
Yeah.
The book is structured in a way that it's an easy read. It's less than 200 pages. And when I speak, I'm somewhat concise and to the point. And that's the way I wrote the book. And a couple of the professional reviewers who have reviewed it have acknowledged the conciseness and the lack of fluff and arbitrary theory that a lot of books contain. And to me, if you read the book and you knew me or had worked with me, I would want you to be able to walk away and say, I can see or hear Jim saying these things. And I kept very, very true to that. It was hard during the editing process because editors wanted to change things. But there's 3 components to the book with regard to each pillar. One is the pillar itself. And I always tell a story, whether about me or someone else in the world who uses that pillar in their own management style. So from those 2 perspectives, one can say, okay, this is how it impacted Jim. But let's take integrity as an example, which I call the non-negotiable pillar. Integrity is not only important to me and how I operate, but if you look at Microsoft, Satya Nadella, when he actually first entered Microsoft in 2014 as CEO, he instilled integrity as the pillar of his leadership and said to the organization, we are going to lead and operate with absolute integrity. And he has done that. So the reader not only gets my perspective, the reader gets footnotes of where they can learn more about Satya Nadella and how he has used leadership at Microsoft. And then the third thing in each of the pillar chapters is how to implement it for yourself. Exercises that you can do or how or what to do to try to influence your own leadership style with that pillar. And so to me, I think that's a separator for me because I've given people what I call a roadmap, and not just my own thoughts, but other people who actually have that characteristic that they can look up.
Yeah, so I very much applaud the conciseness. Like that I think, and we've all done it, I'm sure, maybe not in a book that we're writing, but the written word gets a bit more lengthy, doesn't it? Because it's just, I don't know why. human nature, maybe. And yet, when you're reading books like this, especially leadership books, I find so many of them, they just pour in all this stuff that's, I mean, it may be academically interesting, but it's not necessary for the practical impact that you're trying to have. And I think it detracts from the whole.
I think it does too. And I think, there's a lot of stories in my book, but the stories are used to impact or reference back to the pillar itself, and to be able to connect the dots for the reader. So, if you look at my 6 pillars, 2 of the pillars are empathy and compassion, which I think are 2 very different things. But I also think those are very challenging for leaders, because there's no book that you can pick up that can really say to you, hey, this is how you have to handle compassion, and here's how you have to handle empathy. A lot of it is trial and error, and a lot of it is learning over the course of time. My leadership style has changed as a result of having the opportunity to work with some great leaders and great mentors throughout my career. Now, I've had the bad boss or two. You can't escape the fact that they exist. But I've been very, very lucky, and I've seen how my leadership has evolved and will always evolve, because I've now understand that leadership is not, here's the structure today and it's always going to be this structure. You have to adapt as the economy and as people evolve, etc. And so I was looking back one day, or somebody asked me, well, how did you lead when you were, fresh out of college? And I thought for a second, and I said, well, I graduated college in 1984. So now all of your listeners are calculating my age as we speak. In 1984, in the United States, leadership was still somewhat like it was in the 70s and 60s, more authoritarian, although starting to evolve, where your manager or leader basically gave you a list of things that you had to accomplish that day. Today, that's not how I lead. I'm more collaborative, giving people freedom of how to get to the end of the job and helping them and coaching them through that. And as I was having this conversation, I kept thinking about my first team that I managed right out of college. And I literally said on this podcast, I think I need to find them all and apologize for the way I led them. I didn't do anything illegal or immorally wrong, but I don't do that today. And the difference is so huge.
No, I know exactly what you mean. And yeah, I think my response to that question would be, I don't want to answer. Yeah. Because I have this, and like, even when I was entering the world of work in the first team I was leading, it was, yeah, I mean, it feels like a long time ago to me, but I guess in the grand scheme, it wasn't that long ago. But even then, like, those same kind of approaches, that authoritarian, autocratic sort of style was the norm. Like, that was just management. That's how it was done. And there was no real, despite the fact that, like, some of these more modern theories have been around since the 70s, there's no excuse. Like, there was another way. It's always been there. And this is something I've always struggled with in the workplace and with a lot of leaders and companies I encountered over the years. That's the default position, even though, like, there's mountains of evidence at this point. There's so many studies around things like empathy and compassion and whether people are happy, whether they're offered flexibility at work, all of these sort of things that have a huge impact on not just, like, people's interaction with the work, the state of being at work, but also the results of the company, of the business, like the bottom line. And so I always struggle with, why do people still behave in that old-fashioned way when there's so much evidence that it doesn't produce the same or even anywhere near as good an outcome?
I agree. And, when I think of some of the leaders that were not in the classification of best in class, I think of people where the leader is constantly every year or two changing the chairs underneath them and moving people in and out. And I call that the moving of the chairs on the Titanic. The Titanic is eventually going to sink. It's just a matter of time before it hits the bottom. And so, and actually that part has resonated with a lot of people when they start to think about it, because they can think of, oh, I remember this person, and they used to do that. And what they're doing is hiding their own inferiority or hiding their own inability to lead effectively by changing the people underneath them. But eventually it's going to get discovered, and eventually it's going to get fixed. And so I've seen that happen more than one time in my career, which is a good thing. The bad thing is somebody should have been coaching that individual or that leader into a better way of doing things, which I think as a leader today is my job. My job is to prepare the next set of leaders to move in when I decide to retire or leave or do whatever. And that's why I want to do this full time when I retire, because I think I can help people get to where they can be highly effective.
Yeah. I like the Titanic analogy. That's a good one. The other one that I'm quite partial to is the Emperor's new clothes, i.e. he's not wearing any. Yeah, we used to have that in a former job. Every now and then someone would text you, David, the Emperor's got no clothes on.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you're right about the coaching thing as well. The thing is, though, I think there's some people who are just not coachable. That may not be the right thing to say, but people have to be open to being coached, to learning, to changing as well. And if you're in that mindset where this is how management is done, I know what I'm doing, I don't need to listen to anyone else, it's very difficult to break out of that.
It is. In fact, I'm starting to launch a coaching program, and I've been test marketing it. And one of the questions that the person has to answer is, are you willing to be coached? And if you're not willing to be coached, you're not going to be a good candidate, because you're not going to be open-minded. And you're going to come in and think, I've already got this conquered. But the start of the coaching program consists of a test that you get to self-take to measure whether you're an effective leader today. And if you answer the questions honestly, it'll give you a score and then tell you if that score puts you in the higher level, the middle level, or the lower level, and can really help tell you whether or not you need the program that I have to offer. So, again, I'm test marketing it, but I think I have the ability to have people figure out on their own with this test the areas that they're lacking in.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to do it, because it is that crucial first step. I mean, not just for coaching, for any sort of like self-development or learning. Like if you're not open-minded or open to learn, then you probably won't learn.
Correct. I think, and all of a sudden I'm thinking of Michael Jordan. I think he's one of the greatest legends of all time in basketball, but he had a coach, and that coach gave him direction. And, that coach helped mold him and make him better at what he was doing. Yes, he's a legend, but he still had a coach.
Yeah, and that's a great analogy as well, because again, like leaders get put on a pedestal, don't they? Sometimes by themselves, not always. But I think it's quite easy to forget, like no leader succeeds alone. Like the whole definition of the word, like implies there has to be other people there somewhere. Otherwise, yeah, self-leadership is a thing, I know, but still. Like,
yeah, there's no I in team.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is a me, though, if you rearrange some of the letters.
That's great.
Which I think, since we're both laughing, that leads into the next question, which is, what role does humor play in leadership for you? So
this is the one question that usually the podcast host is like, okay, so I need to ask this question. So I think humor is important, but let me clarify. This is not about the leader being the stand-up comedian at the water cooler at 10 a.m. every day and telling jokes about society or people or no, it's not about that at all. I use humor specifically in a couple of areas. Number one, whenever I kick off a meeting, something to lighten the mood, something to get people to relax and see me as a human like they are. I don't want people thinking that I'm unapproachable or that I'm way up here and they're way down here. We're really like this. And So that's number one. And I think that's critical and important for everybody to remember. The second thing is I use humor in difficult situations where people may be struggling to get to an answer or may be disagreeing, to try to get them to refocus or to redirect. Um, or if there's conflict going on, and part of conflict resolution, talking through it and having something jovial to say. Now, that being said, our society today is hypersensitive. And so the humor that people would use 20 years ago or even 5 years ago doesn't apply today. And you could very easily offend somebody. So most of the time, my humor is self-deprecating humor about something foolish or funny or something that happened to me at some point in my life or career, which there's been a lot of that. And someone once said, Jim, you could have a sitcom on your family in your home life, because I do like to have fun, and I think life is meant to be enjoyed, and it doesn't need to be so uptight. And so weaving that into your leadership, I think, is important, because it makes everybody feel more comfortable that you're not the guy that's just behind the door. And the last thing I want to be is the leader whose door is closed all the time so that people can't walk in and say hello or can't walk by. And I've worked for leaders where there's not only a closed door, there's a guard in front of the door, not a real guard, but an admin of some sort protecting that door to prevent people from just going in. And I don't want to be that leader. I want to be the leader that's approachable.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah. And so for me, I think humor and leadership is kind of that foil to taking yourself too seriously. Because I used to be that sort of person, that sort of manager, where there was no room for humor at work, no jokes. This is serious business and we need to be serious about it. And I came to this realization that actually, like, we spend so much of our lives at work. Do you really want to be in that kind of environment for the majority of your waking life? No, not really. Who does?
and I think you can have fun at work. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, you're in the wrong job, and
Definitely.
You're going to bring that stress home to the family. And I don't want to be that guy either. And, I think, let's face it, life is hard enough. And I think it's getting harder as we evolve, and it will continue to get harder. We have to find time to be able to laugh.
100%. 100%.
Funny. I haven't read Reader's Digest in I don't know how many years, but my parents had subscribed to it. And they always had a section, laughter is the best medicine. I don't know where this stuff comes out of my brain from, but all of a sudden I'm thinking of Reader's Digest and reading every month, laughter is the best medicine. It was probably the only section of the Reader's Digest that I cared about as a kid, because I didn't understand half of the other stuff that they were talking about, because it was all adult stuff. But the humor stuff always resonated with me. And I think we need more of that. When we look at television today in the US, there's not as many comedy TV shows as there was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago. There's a lot less of that. There used to be comedy variety shows. I don't know about in Europe, but in the US, they virtually don't exist anymore. The variety shows today are contests of some sort, whether they be singing or whatever on stage, which I don't have an issue with. But I think we're missing some of the stuff that we grew up with, and how we looked at life and how others laughed at it and did. Anyway, I'm thinking of all these sitcoms are coming back in my head all of a sudden. I don't want to go down that.
No, you're right. We've tended over here to rely on the big US sitcoms as well, to be fair. But you're right. Especially that sort of the old style that we all grew up with, like the canned laughter and the one-liners and that sort of thing. They don't seem to make those anymore. I guess because they're out of fashion, or they're just, I don't know.
And there used
not
to be
popular.
comedy clubs on every street corner, and now in each city there may be one or there may be two.
Yeah,
I think it's time for a resurgence of that. So why don't you start on your side of the pond, and I'll start it on this side of the pond. We'll have a revolution.
Yeah. I'll try not to just remake The Office, because that would be my most relevant experience, sadly. But yeah, it is interesting. I won't name the show, but I was just reading this morning someone's quit one of the big, well-known sketch shows over in your neck of the woods, I think. Well, a bit north of you, and citing specifically like the toxic working environment behind the scenes. And I wonder as well if that has something to do with it, because when you've got that pressure to be funny all the time, and it is big business at the end of the day, isn't it? I can see how that might go off the rails quite easily. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's got nothing to do with it. It's a coincidence.
Who knows? We'll see.
Indeed. Yeah. You always got to take those headlines with a pinch of salt as well, I'm told. So I had another thought and it's completely gone. I've totally lost that train of thought. I'm sure it'll come back to me if it was any good though. So until it does, let's move on to the next question. So obviously the name of the show is all about integrity in leadership. What does it mean to you, and why do you think it's such an important part, particularly when we come to thinking about a leader and shaping their legacy?
So to me, a leader needs to operate with absolute transparency and behave in a way that is both morally and ethically correct 100% of the time. And to me, I think of the line down the middle of the road and being able to stay on that line regardless of the situation. I learned this very early in my professional life in 1984, right after college. I actually ran for a local city election at the age of 23 and won. And not only won, but ran 3 years later for re-election and won re-election. Now, it wasn't a full-time position, but it was a city government position on what was called the city council. And so I had a full-time job, and I ended up having to resign because the company I worked for moved me to Texas. And unfortunately, I would still be in New Jersey, probably, maybe even governor today. Who knows? Probably not. But shortly after the election, the city administrator asked me if I'd come and sit with him for a couple of minutes. So this was 1984. So there are no cell phones or none of that. You didn't have something in your pocket dinging every second. And so we sat down and we were talking, and we were chatting about a few things, and then sorry about
lovely
that.
Bit of irony there, just as you said about a phone ringing.
And very much so. And so we got through the conversation. He said, but before you leave, he said, I want to ask you one favor. Now in politics, I was always warned that be careful of favors. And so right away, my antennae went up, and I said, a favor? And he said, well, let me just finish. He said, you're a very smart individual. You're going to do a great job. I have no doubt. He said, but I would like you to do me one favor. He said, every night when you lay down in bed and right before you close your eyes, I want you to ask yourself one question. And that question is, did I do anything today for my own personal self-benefit that was at the expense of another individual, group of individuals, or organization? And he said, if you say no to that question, you can rest peacefully. But if you say yes to that question, before you can go to sleep, you need to do two things. Number one, you need to figure out if you can unwind what you did. And number two, you need to figure out how to never do it again. That was very, very powerful to hear coming from someone to a 23-year-old. And it hit me upside the head. And I was always very ethical, and so was the family that I came from, and integrity was important. But I never really thought of it in that magnitude. It hit me so hard that I ask myself that question every night till this day. And I can't remember ever saying yes to that question. To me, that makes me feel good that I'm able to stay, regardless of the situation, in the middle of that integrity road and not varying off of it. And I think integrity is to me, it's the center pillar, which holds up the peak of the roof, which is the biggest amount of weight. And to me, if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to have trust in your teams, or your teams are not going to have trust in you. Your teams are not going to follow your vision. If you try to show empathy or compassion to your teammates, they won't believe it, because integrity will now have ruined the impression, or lack of integrity will have now ruined every action that you perform or do as a leader. And so to me, that's why I say that's so non-negotiable, because it really is the difference between, I think, success and failure as a leader if you can't be that way. And so for listeners, think about, I always ask people I interview, tell me the 3 characteristics of your favorite manager you've ever had. And after they give me those 3, I ask them, what are the 3 characteristics of the leaders you have the least amount of respect for today? And I don't ever ask for names. But it's interesting. People know. And people can tell me the things that they really liked about that leader. And you know what? Transparency, integrity, compassion, they're all on that list of what people liked about their favorite leaders. The things that were on the list of the leaders that weren't were extremely micromanaging, no flexibility, and I could go down and on and on and on. And so to me, that became, if it was a statue, the pedestal of the statue. But I went with pillars, so it's the center pillar holding up the peak of the roof, which is where most of the weight is. And without that pillar, everything else crumbles.
I mean, as you can imagine, I've heard quite a few definitions of integrity over the years. The one that always sticks in my memory, though, is that idea about do the right thing, even when no one's watching. And I think that speaks very much to the story you've told there about the questions. And also, like, what a rare mentality, way of looking at the world that must be for a politician these days. Can't imagine many of them saying in that.
Well, and it was probably the one reason why I said after I was transferred, did that, don't need to do it again. Because, as the world's evolved, I've lost faith in our political system. So if you're elected a senator, your salary is under $200,000 a year. So if you have a salary under $2,000 a year, how come within 5 years of becoming a senator, you're a multimillionaire? Something's wrong with that equation. Yes, they can do speaking gigs, and yes, they can get paid for those things. But how many of those things are truly, I don't want to say legit, but how many of those things are truly based on, I went to speak at this company and this was my reward for my speaking, this was my engagement fee, and then that goes back into, so to me, there should be limits on what they can do. And I think our political system here allows for that. I will call it abuse. It's technically not illegal, so I can't really say it's fraud or anything like that. But to me, people shouldn't have to pay to hear a legislator speak because he's elected by the people and works for the people. And the last president to really say that was Ronald Reagan. And that's in the 80s.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And it's similar, but not the same here. The rules around like second jobs and things for our elected, at least at national level, very slack. Like, to me, if you've been voted into public office at a national level, that's your only job. It shouldn't be legal. It is, but it shouldn't be legal for you to have any other paying work while you're serving in that role. If only because it's like backdoor sort of implied access and privilege to whoever else you're working for. Even it's stealthy bribes in my mind anyway. But
I'll just leave you with this thought. we don't allow our military, the people who are defending our freedoms, have side jobs because that takes them away of their mission to protect us. And so it's very easy if you have that mentality, why doesn't it transcend every position?
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
We went down a rabbit hole there. Sorry
We
about
did.
that.
No, it's cool. I'm fascinated by the politics side of it, but I do try not to talk about it too much because I know a lot of people just, as soon as they hear the P word, they switch off, which is fair enough. But then when you're talking about leadership, it's also quite difficult not to, because it's like the biggest example of leadership in our world, isn't it? In a lot of ways, at least the one that most people will immediately recognize. But yeah, I mean, you're right. The system broken in a lot of respects for both of our countries, I think. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think just based upon the way you and I look at leadership and integrity, I couldn't see myself in that world.
No, me neither.
So anyway, let's move on.
Indeed. Back to integrity again. Another question that is it a question? I don't know. It's sort of a debate I've had with a few people. I had one guest in particular a year or two ago where we were talking about the concept of values and what your values are as a leader. And he made a very impassioned, well-explained argument that integrity isn't actually a value. Integrity is the result of your values. What do you think about that? Do you agree, disagree, have a third way? What are your thoughts?
I don't know that I disagree with that because you have to operate with integrity 100% of the time. Could it be an outcome, or is it the framework of which you operate within? I personally see it as the framework that guides you. Can I see it also being the outcome? Possibly. But I also think that you can't have the other things without having and starting with integrity.
Yeah, I think he was coming at it from the angle of like integrity is the result of following your values. And I sort of see where he's coming from. I don't disagree with him either. I sort of think it's both, though. I think it's the result and it is a value too.
You see my head going like this because I'm trying to, I mean, I can see the perspective. I don't disagree with the perspective. And I do believe that there's some intertwining of them. And it could be the outcome as well, because be good to others and all of the other things that our parents taught us all point to the fact that if you do and live by these principles, you will have integrity at the end or be deemed to have had integrity. But my thought process is, in my mind, I have to start that way to show people I have integrity in order for me to be able to show them I'm compassionate and caring about them as individuals. And I think as a leader, that's important because I view my job as a leader as I have to recognize when an employee is having a bad day and whether that bad day is reflected of the work that they were given or doing, or is that bad day reflective of the dog is ill and nobody can take it to the vet, or somebody is ill in the family, and being able to approach that employee, understanding what they're going through, and then offering them time to go be with that family member or be with that pet so that the next time they're back into the office, they're back with the smile on their face, with their head up and chin up and doing not sloughing. And I don't mean people slough off, but it's tough to do what we need to do if we're emotionally tied to something that's drawing our attention away. And as a leader, I think it's my responsibility to understand and see when that's happening and to be able to then step in and offer to see whether I can provide compassion or empathy, solution, or at least some direction for helping them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you mentioned earlier that empathy and compassion being part of your 6 pillars. And I think that's why, isn't it? Especially in situations like that where there's illness at home. Like, of course, you're not going to do a good job, nor should you be. Like, work shouldn't be top of your priority list at that point. And I get very, not angry. I don't want to say angry. I get frustrated with managers who can't join those dots. Because again, even if it's like a pet, so maybe you don't keep pets, or you're not a dog person, and the person's dog is ill, and you're like, well, it's just a dog, who cares? Even if that's your perspective, it's not their perspective.
Correct.
So apply the empathy, have a bit of compassion for what that person is going through, right? Yeah, I get quite frustrated with that, but you see less of it these days. I think managers, leaders are waking up to that now. I hope.
I hope too. I hope more and more of them are. I don't think people talk about their pets or their animals as much as they probably used to. It's very rare that, unless it's a service dog, you can bring a pet into a work environment or an airport or whatever. But I also don't believe that every dog's an emotional support dog, and that I have an anxiety issue and this dog needs to be with me 24/7. Anyway, I think there's a small part of that. There are people that take advantage of the system no matter what happens. So,
yeah, I mean, there's always going to be the odd bad apple, isn't there? But I don't know. I guess I'd rather trust first until proved wrong on that, rather than the other way around.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Anyway, so I've just noticed the time. I've totally lost track of it. We must be having fun. So this might be a difficult question for you. I don't know. Well, let's find out. If you had to pick like the one biggest leadership lesson from your career so far, what would it be?
Outside of integrity, I would say the hardest thing I had was learning compassion and empathy. And they're hard. They're hard. You don't know how to approach someone who's, it's funny, when someone dies, somebody always says, I know how you feel. No, you don't know how they feel. You know how you felt when you were in that situation. But saying, I know how you feel, is not necessarily a real response. And sometimes it's received as, well, that was fake because he didn't ask me how I felt. And he didn't ask me my connection to that relative. And he didn't ask me. And so those pillars are very, very hard to learn. And I'll tell you a story about that sort of combines the two, empathy and compassion, that I struggled with. And this is a true story. At one time in my career, around circa 2001, 2002, I worked for a technology company that made healthcare claim systems to process medical claims. And I had a small department that was based in California that was old green screen technology. So MS-DOS, green screen, no mouse on the computer, and Windows applications were starting to replace them. And we had developed Windows applications and had them available, but we had 20 or 30 customers still on this green screen technology. And at a management meeting, we discussed we were going to sunset that product. And so we started talking about sunsetting that product and how long it would take us to convert people to the Windows product. So we knew that it would take anywhere from 12 to 18 months to convert a single entity, depending on their size, over to the new technology. And we created a plan that showed it eventually would take 3 years to get everybody converted. So my job was, I had to tell the team that the product was going away. But I also had to tell the team that we had customers to support and they couldn't run out the door. And I didn't know how to handle that situation. And I struggled with that. And I started to think, what would I want my manager to tell me at that point in time? So I came up with 3 things, selfishly, and I will admit, to preserve the fact that we needed to take care of the clients that we had until they were converted. So I met with the employees and I made 3 promises to them. Promise number 1, every person would know with at least 6 months notice or more when their job would be going away, and that it would be based on the transition time frame of each of the clients that were converting. What I couldn't account for was a client that was already converting to another company's platform, but we didn't know about it. And so in those situations, we had to adjust and somehow make it. So the first thing I promised them, they would know as soon as I knew when I thought their particular role would go away. That was commitment number 1. Commitment number 2, for those individuals who wanted to stay in the company and continue on working in the new platform area in the Windows stuff, I would make training available to them during the workday, during the time between that day and when they were projected to roll off of the team. That was promise number 2. Promise number 3, if you didn't want to stay with the company and you didn't want to learn the new products and you wanted to think of a pathway out of the company, I would help you find a job on the outside that met the financial needs of your family and got you something with a reputable firm that you could continue on with your career. An amazing thing happened. I succeeded in not having anyone leave before it was time for them to leave. 2 years into this project, I get a phone call from HR. And they said, "Can we come and talk to you?" Nobody likes it when HR says, "Can we come and talk to you?" They didn't bring an empty box and they didn't bring my manager with them. So I felt pretty good that I wasn't going to be packing up that day. And they asked if they could sit down, and they sat down and they said, "We want to talk about your team in California." And I said, "Oh." Just like that, I said, "Oh." And they said, "Well, you'll recall about 2 months ago, we did an employee satisfaction survey." And I said, "Yes." And I said, "Did they take it?" And they said, "Every single one of those employees took that." And I said, "How bad was it?" And they said, "Well, that's the funny part. They're the happiest employees in this company, and we have 20,000 employees. How can they be so happy if you're removing them out of their jobs and displacing them?" And I never thought about that potential outcome. But in retrospect, when I told them what I did, they were like writing scrupulous notes about how to properly downsize a department and the things you need to do as a leader. But what I didn't realize at the time, but in retrospect, if I was an employee, I would want to know, how much time do I have? I made them that commitment. I would want to know if I had any options to stay where I was at because I liked the company and did well at the company. And number 3, I took all worry about finding another job off of their plate and said I would help them. So when they went home to say they were losing a job, they didn't go home and kick the dog or the cat or the kid or and say, "I'm losing my job. I'm out of a job in 30 days. They went home and said, "Well, in maybe 2 years or 3 years, I'm going to be out of a job, but here's the plan." And so they all had a roadmap and a transition plan. And I didn't lose anyone before it was time to leave. And I still, on National Bosses Day, get 2 emails from 2 of the people on that team still thanking me for being their favorite boss. I don't know that the others hate me. I just don't get emails from the other ones. But the fact that they remembered what I did for them is important to me and really ties in the transparency, the integrity, the empathy and compassion, and how loyal they became as a result of it. And they were really happy. I mean, who knows they're losing their job and is happy about it? Probably nobody, but this group was. So that was probably the hardest thing I learned. Second to that was understanding I didn't have to have all the answers as a leader. When I first started out, I thought I had to have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I didn't then, I don't now, but I can commit to working to find the right answer. That was probably the second hardest thing.
I really like that story. You could see me smiling and nodding all the way through, I'm sure. The listeners maybe can't. So that third promise in particular, it's come up a few times because I've always thought, like, in that situation, that seems like the right thing to do. And most people agree with me when I say that, but I think you're the first person I've met who's actually done it in practice. And it's so nice to hear that the outcome as a result of that as well is exactly what I thought it should be.
And actually, in retrospect, it was more than what I thought it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, to know that they were, and it also meant to me that they were so happy that they were still putting in the same level of effort. The number of defects in their software coding didn't dramatically increase because they're depressed because they now know they're losing their job. They're happy with what they're doing. So their output was higher. And as you started to look back at all the numbers, you could see that they were really productive. And our clients probably got better service than they had gotten previously. Not that they got bad service, because the people were happier than maybe they were with a prior manager or leader.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it into a cliche or anything, but it's things like the trust, the respect, it's feeling seen, feeling valued. We have this saying in the UK, I don't know if it works over there, but when you're not telling people everything, when you're not having that transparency, that you're treating them like a mushroom, right? So you're keeping them in the dark and feeding them on, and it's the exact opposite of that. Because when you treat people that way, they become, even if they're not fearing their jobs are under threat, they'll still become like disengaged, unhappy, low morale. They're not going to work as hard. They'll be miserable in the office. It'll be really difficult to get even a conversation out of them because they don't feel like they're being seen, heard, respected, valued for what they're doing. Whereas, and it's such a great example. I really love that. I'm going to keep gushing about this story now because it's like the literal worst thing that can happen to an employee is like that potential of losing your job and your security. And yet, because of the way you dealt with that situation as their leader, you were transparent, you respected and trusted them enough with that knowledge, you valued them enough to try and help them through it, whatever path they chose to take, and it became their choice because of those questions, those promises that you made to them. So even in that kind of worst of the worst situation, they've ended up being happy, well-engaged, hard-working employees. I mean, it's almost unheard of, isn't it? So I can only applaud it.
It is. And I will tell you, and it came about from a lot of restless nights trying to figure out what to do. I was scrounging management books and different things. And, I wanted somebody to just hit me with a piece of paper of what do I do? Because my leadership was basically, don't forget, you got to let those people know they're losing their jobs. That was it. And I'm using the word but there was no magic pill, and it was uncharted waters for me as a leader, and I think that's why so many leaders have difficulty with empathy and compassion, because it is hard. And you need time to think through it in order to approach it. I mean, I had a number of sleepless nights, more than one, trying to figure this out. And anyway, it worked out for the best. Now, that doesn't mean I've not made mistakes in my career. I have. I don't think any leader can stand in front of you and say they haven't made mistakes. But it's important to recognize them and not repeat them. And so I certainly do that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, I mean, the temptation in those situations, especially when you're the middle level manager, where you've got your own boss telling you, raining down on you. The temptation is, of course, to just keep it to yourself for as long as possible. And just like the natural human assumption for most managers, I think, maybe not, maybe I'm being unfair to managers, but is just keep that to yourself until you absolutely have to tell them, because as soon as you tell them, they're not going to work as hard and you need them to get the job done in the meantime. So it's just, again, such a stark demonstration as well of like the power of empathy, and like being able to put yourself in others' shoes and why that matters and what the results are by comparison. So anyway, let's not labor it anymore. So are you okay time-wise? Because we're over the hour now, so I don't want to...
I am good. I have a few more minutes.
Okay, all right. So I have one final question then, but this is the one that everyone has to answer because it's my favorite question. So it's called Leadership Heroes.
Leadership Heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, but they could be literally anyone you could think of, like alive or dead, past or present, real or even fictitious, if you feel like it, but it's someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be for you and why?
From the years 2000 to 2007, I worked at a company called Perot Systems that was founded by Ross Perot, who's a name you probably recognize, who once ran for president. And I would characterize him as the most influential person in my career on leadership. Mr. Perot his dad was a cotton farmer in Texarkana, Texas. He went to the Naval Academy. He founded a company in the 60s called Electronic Data Systems, EDS. He sold it later to General Motors. I think became the first billionaire in the Dallas area. When his non-compete ran out, he created Perot Systems. I joined them after they were 10 years old, I guess, or even a little bit more than that. But he was such an amazing man. He returned every phone call of anyone who called him, regardless of whether he knew them or not. His philosophy was, they're calling me because they think I can help them. And if there's a way for me to help them, I will. We had policies that if we had an employee or a member of an employee's family who was seriously ill, we had to report it to his office. And he wanted us to make sure that we not only took care of the family, but that we got the best medical care for that person in the country. And if that meant he needed to fly the family and the individual there, he would. I had a situation where I had a 28-year-old man who needed open heart surgery and have a valve replaced. He was a single individual. He was on the West Coast. Mr. Perot's office thought better care could be given to him in Dallas, so I presented that offer to him. He chose to stay in California so his family could be close by. We offered to bring the family to Texas and all expenses paid. He still decided to stay in California. And my job was, I had to make sure that family was fed 3 times a day because this kid was going to be in intensive care for at least a week. So I called the hospital before he got admitted, and I said, I have a young man coming into the hospital. I need to talk to somebody in the food area and hospital cafeteria or whatever, because I need a way to be able to feed this family 3 times a day. And they told me they couldn't do that. So I called the CEO's office and I said, I have this situation. I explained it to him and I said, I have to feed this family 3 times a day. I've talked to your food people. They cannot figure out a way to do it. I don't care if the people come down to the cafeteria, you give them a special card or whatever. I'm going to pay for it. We will pay for the food. We just need to have food there for them 3 times a day, if any family member is there. And if I can't do that through you, I have an obligation to bring in caterers 3 times a day, and they will go to the waiting room on the floor this kid is on, and they will set up the food for them. And they said, well, you can't do that. And I said, well, why can't I? That's not illegal. And he said, well, let me figure this out. Let me call you back. So I get a call 2 days later. He said, okay, we figured it out. we have a way to feed them. And I said, don't forget, I'm going to pay for this. He said, I understand. And so the kid ended up being, I say kid, he was 28, but he was an adult. But he was in the hospital for a little over a week. The family was fed. He comes back to work, and it's like 4 months later, and I realize I never got a bill. So I called the CEO, and his admin answered, and I explained who I was, and I explained the situation. She said, I remember. And she said it really stressed him out, that situation, but I believe the family was taken care of. I said they were, and I owe him money, and I've not gotten a bill. He called me back an hour later, and he said to me, Mr. Carlough, we're not sending you a bill. He said, as I thought through this, I realized what you were doing for an employee of the company and realized how important it was for you to take care of that family. I learned a very valuable leadership idea from what your company does. And I have never done that for an employee or their family. And I run the hospital. But I have an obligation like you do to take care of that family, not just the medical care of the employee. So I want to thank you for teaching me something about leadership that I didn't know. Paying it forward.
It's such a powerful example of leadership and the impact it can have. And I steal the phrase trickle down from economics, where I don't think it works. But in leadership, it 100% works, doesn't it? And that's a great example of it.
It is a great example. It absolutely is. And I can tell you other stories of things that Mr. Perot did that I witnessed that nobody would ever know about unless you were there. And he, if there was somebody in the military or former military who was having a family issue, he was there to help them. He didn't care where they were. He made sure those families were all taken care of. Now, you're a lot younger than I am, but when he owned EDS, he had some of his employees taken captive in another country. And there's a book out called On Angels, on the Wings of, I can't, now I'm going blank on, I'll have to look it up. But it's about a rescue mission that he organized with the military to rescue those employees. On the Wings of Eagles, I think is the name of it. But it's a story of these employees being taken hostage and how he fought to get them back because that was his obligation. You can't find a leader that I think can be above what he's done for people, or what he's unfortunately deceased now. But
yeah, certainly not in a commercial setting. I mean, I struggle in other settings as well, at least in like contemporary world. But yeah, I mean, that's so rare. I mean, you're right. You don't find leaders like that.
You don't.
Yeah. Amazing. And yeah, I have nothing else to offer. I think we just let that story speak for itself, really. Thank you so much for sharing that and all the stories you have today, Jim. It's been an absolute pleasure. Great to meet you, as I mentioned already. And last small thing I'll ask, if anyone in the audience would like to learn more about you, perhaps get a copy of the book, is there a website or anything else you'd like to direct them towards?
So absolutely. So they could order the book directly off of my website. And that website is www.jimcarlough, all connected, JimCarlough.com. You can communicate with me via there. You can sign up for my newsletter, purchase the book. My phone number's there. If I can mentor or give you guidance on something, I'm in Dallas, Texas. So the hours are a little bit different, and I don't answer my phone at 3 a.m. only because I don't hear it ring. But if there's anything I can do, feel free to reach out to me. I get emails from around the world now these days, and it's interesting some of the emails you get and the questions that you get. But I'd be more than happy to communicate with any of your listeners, and hopefully something resonated with you today. And if it did, and you heard it, please comment on social media about it when we post the episode. It helps both David and I learn whether we're driving the value that we want to drive for you.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, Jim, I'll let you go because I know you're a busy man and you've got other meetings to get to, I'm sure. Thank you again so much for your time today. It's been wonderful. I hope we can do it again someday.
Please reach out at any time. This was very enjoyable, David. I truly, truly hope this resonates with your readers or your listeners, and we can certainly do it again.
Absolutely. Well, you're welcome back anytime.
Thanks, sir.
Jim, thank you again for being with us today. Excellent discussion, and it was, as I said, great to meet you. Listeners and viewers, as always, do check out those show notes, click on the links, go and learn more about Jim, get a copy of his book, hear about some of the work that he does. And if you are a new leader looking for support, advice, a sounding board, a mentor, or just a friendly ear as you try to find your way through the star lanes of your leadership voyage, then I invite you to come and join my online leadership community. It's called Integrity Leaders, and it's a supportive community of new leaders for new leaders. Leadership is lonely, especially the first time you do it, but it doesn't have to be that way. A leadership community like this can help you lead with confidence, fight off those imposter feelings, and gain clarity on your leadership style. Hopefully, all without feeling quite as alone as you might right now. So if you want to know more, do pay a visit to www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. Hit that green button on the homepage. The link is in the description as well, so you can find that easily, hopefully. Or if you want to have a chat first, do feel free to find me on LinkedIn. If you prefer, drop me a DM and let's have a conversation about leadership. Thanks so much for listening or watching today. Do tune in again next week for my next guest, Clay Moffat, who is an ex-Navy weapons tech, for a chat about trust, betrayal, and responsibility. And that's it from me today. As always, remember, be a leader, not a boss.